And we're going along, and as we like going right across towards the shipping lane, now you know the shipping lane is where the big ships are, okay? Where the small little things, these big ships, okay? As we're going along, he sees one of the other boats, which had 3 men on it, and they had capsized. They were, Brendan's like, hey, should we go see if they need a hand? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it, you know? So we tack, because that's kind of men we are. We'll help you. If you're in trouble, we will be there. So anyway, we tack, we go out, we come flying past them, like white water behind us. We go past them, and Brendan shouts out, do you have a writing rope? But we're going so fast that there's no ways they would have heard us, you know? We then tack to come back, and as we tack to come back, the wind really hits us, and we realize where we are. All of a sudden, I'm flying, and all I remember is Brendan saying this to me. If for some reason, which doesn't happen often, we capsize, don't fall through the sail. Okay, the sails are expensive. So like hits a side wire or anything, but don't go through the sail. So as this boat's going over, Brendan's flying off there. I'm like, miss this big thing in front of me. I duck off to the one side. I miss the sail. Okay. Land in the water, yes, okay. And so there we are capsized. I've got a photo. If you don't realize, we're this little boat over here, and there's another little boat over there. Those are the guys we're trying to save, okay? There's the shipping lane. You can see where we are, okay? Just give you, that's about a 42-foot cat, okay? It's going along, and then there's the big ships which are coming. I'm in the water, and there's these waves, and it's windy, and I'm like, Brendan seems pretty relaxed. He's like holding on, and he's giving me instruction. I'm like, oh, we got this. And Brendan's like, hold here. And then after about 15, 20 minutes of us doing, I don't know what we were doing, okay, this boat's like on its side, and then it starts going over. And that part of the sail starts just getting deeper and deeper, and all of a sudden I see it disappearing, and all of a sudden it's up. And I hear him mumbling these words, turtle, turtle. Now apparently, if you've got a catamaran, that's the last word you want to hear is turtly in a catamaran, because basically it means you're the wrong way round. Okay, and it's almost impossible to get your boat up. I remember after 45 minutes of Brendan trying everything, and he seems like he's got it all under control. At one stage, he's busy holding, I'm busy trying to hold on to him. We're getting all of our way to get this, because now the sail's underneath. It's ropes, and it's muscle, our muscles are sore, it's back breaking. And we're drifting into the shipping lane. And there's not much panic in his eyes, just a little bit of panic, okay? And eventually this thing gets back up onto its side, as you see in the picture. This is NSRI photos, just by the way. I'll explain that just now. We get this boat onto its side, and we get it up. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's it. And as we get it up, I just see it go the complete other way. Boof, over onto the other side, okay? Brendan is looking worse for wear, okay? And I start to get this sinking feeling that maybe we're just a little bit out of our depth, okay? Anyway, we go for a while, and eventually Brendan's like, I can see he's just holding on to the hull. He's not even doing anything. I'm like, okay, can I help? What must I do? We get it up the third time. Boof, we get it, we hold it, we get in there, we get it, we put our exhausted bodies onto it. The wind is now absolutely wild, and NSRI pull up next to us in their boat. You guys need help. You know? And Brendan's like, no, we're good. We've got this. You know, I'm in the hands of Brendan. You know, we've got this. You know? He's like, no, we're good. There's some other guys over down there. They need a bit of help. You know, they were like right into the shipping lane. So here we are, checking the rigging and everything. Brendan says, okay, let's go home. We pull in the ropes, and we're busy going. All of a sudden, there's like this noise, and there's this wind, and we take off like a drag race on this boat, okay? And all of a sudden, the front sail rips off, it flies off, and Brendan, I could see the panic in his face, and he's trying to turn, and the boat won't turn, and he says, listen, the jib is broken, can you climb out there, okay? You can't really see, but you've got to climb out to the very front of this boat, and I find a bit of rope, and I'm like, tie this thing up, and, you know, we get it, and all we want to do is go home. Brendan, by now, the wind is rough. We tried to tack a couple times. That almost flips us. We are not in control. The waters are wild. and then our rudder breaks. The bolt comes off. I'm busy holding on, trying to hold this thing. Brendan, I don't know, I think he had given up because now we weren't even going home. We're going in the totally opposite direction as long as we didn't flip again. The NSRI come to us again. You guys sure you don't need a hand? We're like, Brendan's like, yeah, that'd be nice. Can you tow us in? We come back to the shore and like everybody's waiting because they'd sent out drones, okay? And the drones had picked up this footage and yeah, it was quite a welcoming party. We were glad to be alive. I've never kissed the ground so many times. But it's actually quite scary when you're in troubled waters and when you've lost control of circumstances. Some people actually give up. I know some people that have actually said they were in a place like that where their boats had flipped and they almost just wanted to just let go. In fact, if somebody hadn't have come along or dived in or helped, they'd just given up. They'd tried for long. You eventually, it sounds weird, but an hour, I mean, how can you not just pull your, but when you're out there and it's wet and it's wild and you're just trying to hang on for life, you just actually cannot go. And I've heard some sailors talk about just how they were that close. If that didn't happen, this would have happened. Troubled waters. What is your out of control circumstance, your troubled water this morning? You know, that situation where it kind of feels hopeless, actually feels a little bit helpless. You know, you're subject to the authority of something or someone. And in fact, it feels like you've got no more control of where things are going. Who here likes to be out of control? Who of you likes to be in control? Okay? Majority. Those who didn't put up your hands, you're probably the worst control freaks, okay? Because you won't put up your hands because somebody told you to, and like, I control this narrative. I'll put up my hand when I want to. So inside you've got your hand up, but deep down, no ways. Can you all hear me? They're a bit better now, hey? Okay, great. Acts 12, verse 1. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Then when he saw that this met approval amongst the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread, and after arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. The story starts with troubled waters. The story starts with a whole lot of stuff that isn't supposed to be happening, right? You know, this is the story of the early church. Jesus is alive, okay? Everybody's excited. Jesus is alive. This is the miracle work in Jesus. And the disciples are going out, and the church is supposed to flourish and grow, and just all good things are supposed to happen. It's supposed to be easy, and it's supposed to be powerful. Yet the story sets a very different scene. Herod is in control, and Peter is not. Herod is in control, and Peter is not. Some of you may recognize the word Herod here, and some of your Bibles actually describes which Herod is. This is the nephew of Herod Antipas, okay? Not many of you will know who that was. Herod Antipas is the one who had John the Baptist beheaded, okay? He was the forerunner to Christ and spoke of him, okay? This is the nephew of him. This is the Herod that's mentioned here as the grandson of Herod the Great. The same Herod that tried to kill Jesus and had all the babies killed, okay? This is that Herod. He's part of that family, okay? It was a family line that was not favorable to Jesus. And for this Herod, this is a retake of the crucifixion. You know, his family couldn't get it right with Jesus. Jesus was killed over the Passover, so it's a significant time. And he rose again. But this Passover, he takes James, who was one of the close followers, we'll see just now, and has him killed. Because, you know, James is not going to rise. And then he does something. He grabs Peter, and he's going to wait until the end of the Passover, and then he's going to have Peter killed. In fact, he makes sure of this. He makes sure that nobody will steal Peter. Okay, because if you remember, there were rumors that were started that when Jesus died, that the disciples came and stole his body. That's what they told the soldiers and that to say. This Herod was not going to let that happen. He has 16 men to guard Peter. He even chains Peter's hands to 2 of the guards on either side of him. And the whole point of the story is to know that Herod is in control and Peter is not. I mean, this is a done and dusted deal. There is no hope. Peter is one of the closest. You know, there were 3 that were closest to Jesus. Peter, James, and John. And in the early church, James is dead. We sometimes just read that statement and go, okay, James is dead, but Peter's still alive. James is dead. For Peter, this would have been absolutely soul-destroying. He was part of the 3 that were with Jesus all the time. And James, who was close, is now dead. You would think, you know, of all the disciples, good things. In fact, he's sitting there and Peter is next. I want to remind you this morning that if you've come to church because you think the Christian life is easy, it's not. In fact, the norm of the Christian life is often full of hopeless and helpless, troubled water situations. This is actually the norm. It's not always easy. If you think being a Christian means it always goes right all the time, I'm going to save you the show and tell you that it doesn't. You've got it wrong. Jesus, when he's given his last words to his disciples in John 16, he actually mentions this. He says, he promises trouble will come. Trouble will come. And just because you're saved by faith, it doesn't mean you've got a get out of jail free card. And I know this is a hard message to hear, but following Jesus may cost you absolutely everything. Just because you're saved by faith, Doesn't mean that sin doesn't have consequences, that we live in a sinful world. Death is real and trouble will come. This isn't a story you've heard before, then you need to come join Missions Week. Because there's people who are out on a mission for God and His Word. They've given up everything and they've followed Christ with all of their heart and they actually die for their faith. James, one of the beloved ones, dies. And Peter is chained up and is waiting his death. We forget that this is often the story and the circumstance. That not everybody makes it in faith. The problem is, what happens when we get into those troubled waters? Because my experience, and I've seen it in a few, and it's so disheartening that troubled waters often shipwrecks our faith. When things go wrong, and we sit there, chained between whatever circumstance we find ourselves, we don't always come out the other side. Troubled water tests your faith, and some leave the faith. And I'm sure you've all grappled. If God is good, why do I not have good? Will a good God really allow bad things to happen to those He loves? I mean, these are real questions in troubled times. When things are out of control. And I just want to warn you here that I've seen too many times where troubled waters shipwreck our faith. The norm for the Christian in God's will is often to be in troubled times. It's not where the message ends this morning. But I want us to hold to that because Peter's friend James was dead. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. Whenever the Bible has a but, okay, or a therefore, means you actually stop and you listen. And here Luke, as he writes the story, he puts this in here because in the midst of this out of control situation where Peter has no option. He is but a slave to the circumstances in which he finds himself. Nero is control. He adds this but, and we need to listen. The church was praying earnestly. I want to remind you in our troubled waters that the Herods of our life are not in control. They think they are, but they're not. The control was not in Herod's hands as he thought. I mean, up until now, the story was set and the outcome was guaranteed. And we see this time and time again. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, King Nebuchadnezzar, know this, that even if you throw us into the fire and we lose our lives, know that our God is greater than any other God. And we will still be faithful to Him. Job, even though he may slay me, yet I will still hold on to Him. Joseph, sold into slavery. Daniel was lowered into the lion's cage. But the church were praying earnestly. And I brought this with today. It's a little bit dirty. Because I remember when we went into the water, Brendan, we had these things on. It does fit, okay? I know what you're all thinking. It fits. I'm going to zip it up just on purpose now because I know you're all looking at me. Look. Okay. Phew, I can breathe again. I sailed for 4 hours last week in a race. You know, I had to hold my breath for 4 hours. That's big. I can tell you now, when you're on that boat, this thing is quite irritating. It gets in the way. It's bulky, and you can't get stuff. In fact, the one when that day we had, sometimes you got these big ones, and when you land in the water, this thing is pulling up to your ears, and it's really irritating. When you're trying to hold ropes, this thing gets in the way. When you're trying to get underneath the boom because our boat's not that big and you're busy sailing, this thing becomes a hindrance when you're on the boat, when you're in control. I can tell you now, that day, you don't realize what this does. And I've been messing around, and you jump off the boat and you've got to try to get onto the boat without this on. And all of a sudden you realize how important this is. You realize your need for this. I can tell you now, the only time you're thankful for this is when you're in those troubled waters and it's drowning you and you've got nothing left in you but to hold on to this. This is the story that we see here. But Peter was in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. I want to tell you now, in the troubled waters of your life, you need a praying church, and you need to be a praying church. Because you see, prayer prepares you for the troubled waters. It really does. In fact, prayer sometimes seems like a hindrance. It can seem like it's something which is in the way. Oh, I've got to pray today. In fact, sometimes prayer is not our priority. How often is prayer not our priority? But there's something that happens when we pray. It builds a dependency upon God. Peter had something when he was out of control, and it was a church that was praying. And as I read this passage and as I looked at this, I just thought, are we that type of church that prays? Are we those type of people that pray even when we're in control? Are we the ones that are praying for troubled waters? And if you're part of our prayer group, you often get these messages, and some people have said to me, I don't even know what half these things are about. Makes me just realize how important prayer is, to pray for the things even we don't know about, that we can pray into them. When things are out of control and a loved one is sick, or a business is crashing, or a child that is wayward, when you have a praying church and you're in those troubled waters, something happens. Prayer is what carries you through troubled waters. And I want to tell you this now. I've seen guys go out without their life vests. Some people don't think they need that thing. I can tell you now, come the day when that boat flips and they're out of control, they forget how important this thing is. Prayer is what takes you, the discipline of putting that thing on, the discipline of learning to live with the jacket of prayer is what carries you through your troubled waters. Because there will be a time when troubled waters come. And you know what the difference is? And this is what really gets me in this, and I've heard it a couple times this week, is people have gone through different grief. You see, both the Christian and the non-Christian will land up in the water. We will all land up in troubled times. But I can tell you now, when you've got this on in prayer and in faith, keeps us afloat when we actually want to give up. And so many people have said to me, I don't know how somebody of faith doesn't get through. And I say, I know how we get through. See, we are never alone in our troubled waters. God is with you in the fire. We sang the song this morning. He stands in the lion's den with you. Isaiah 43 verse 2 says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burnt up. The flames will not consume you. I can tell you in our church, there's Peters that are going through troubled waters. But they're turning around here going, I'm fine. Got it all under control. No, they don't. They need a church which prays. So I can tell you now, you may not think you need prayer now, but there's going to come a time where you need a church that prays. Because there's times where you just want to say, Lord, just take me. Prayer is the only answer. Yet we often lack as people of prayer. And I talked that about our church, quite honestly. We've got our Zoom prayers, and it's faithful few that go there. We've got our in-person prayers. And yet we wonder why the circumstances within our lives are so out of control in our workplace, in our cities, in our country, in our home. Prayer should be good enough reason for you to gather. And yet every church battles with prayer. It's one of the hardest things to get people to do is to pray. If you don't believe, that getting together to pray is enough reason to go to church, you've got to talk to God about that. Our God needs to put you, maybe this, don't pray this, but I pray that God doesn't put you in circumstances where you have nothing but prayer. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers bound with two chains, and sentries stood at guard at the entrance. That's cue, he's never getting out, not even Mission Impossible, okay? Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. I don't know, but when I read the story, I kind of go, Peter was just asleep. I mean, come on, who in that circumstance before you're about to die decides to go to sleep? I know the comrades runners that night before, you get a restless sleep. In fact, your good night sleep is the night before, okay, the comrades. So Friday night is when you actually get your sleep. The Saturday night, you're waking up that you've left your shoes behind, or, that you're not at the start, and it goes on and on and on. And here, it says that it takes an angel to wake Peter up. How deep a sleeper is he? Eh? That's not me. That's probably not you many times. When there's trouble moments, you're anxious, you're fretful, you're trying to work it out, you've got this sleepless nights. In fact, a lot of the time you're saying, Lord, just take me now. It would be better. An angel has to walk into the room with this bright light and eventually give him a bit of a clap and say, Peter, wake up. How? Because this isn't the Peter before Jesus died. I don't know if you realize that. In Mark 4, we see that Jesus is asleep in a storm. And I've used it a couple times. The disciples, there's a storm going on, it's raging, and Jesus is not up there. The disciples are fretting, they're out of control, they're about to die. And do you know where they find Peter? He's sleeping in the hole. In fact, it's the account of Mark 4, and if you've been doing our book study, which we started last week, it's quite interesting. The Gospel of Mark is written by Mark, but it's the eyewitness account of Peter. Okay, if you didn't realize that. It's actually the eyewitness account of Peter written by Mark, if you wanted to look at the Gospel like that. So in Mark 4, the story that actually happens there is Peter's account of what he experienced, and he told Mark the story. So Mark wrote it down in Mark 4. And in the story, Peter goes down and he sees Jesus sleeping on a cushion, and he turns and he asks and he questions Jesus. He says, "You're asleep and we are dying." He questions Jesus' control over the situation. You see, it's in moments like that troubled times wreck our faith. Jesus, you're asleep and we're busy dying. Peter's that guy who says it straight as it is. You read his words. He's quite brash in Scripture. And so he questions Jesus. He says, "Don't you care that we die?" Jesus gets up and he calms the storm and all those things. Fast forward a few events later, and Peter's in a different storm. Here he is, he's chained and he's about to die, and he sleeps. An amazing thing about this is when you read Peter's accounts of Jesus as written by Mark, you see a growth of spiritual maturity in Peter that from a guy who would fret and worry about troubled waters, I'm going to die, now he is actually facing death. This is a guarantee. I'm going to be actually put to the sword. And he's sleeping peacefully. See, the more we grow in faith, the greater we have peace in troubled waters. The more you grow spiritually, the more you mature you become, like an old person who wakes up for nothing. Peter was fully aware of what he faced. He knew, there's 16 guards, I'm not getting out of this. There is no second act. He knew what he faced, but he is fully secure in the one that he followed. Man, how he's grown from that first time when he thought, Jesus, are you going to leave us to die? I want you to hear this line. Calm waters is not the answer to troubled times. So I can tell you now, there's going to be more troubled times. They come. Those of you who have been around longer, you realize that the troubled times, just when you think you've reached it, then the next trouble comes. And sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's easier. Some of you are nodding your head. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Calm waters is not the answer to troubled times. The answer is knowing Jesus more. Because peace for Peter is found in Jesus, not in what he does in your circumstances. And it's why with James, his story ends with his death. Because his death did not prove that Jesus was not faithful. Jesus was always faithful, even though it takes your life. John 16:33, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace, as he says to his disciples. And this Peter lives out these words. I've told you these things so that in me you have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. Then the angel said to Peter, put on your clothes and sandals, and Peter did so. Wrap your cloak around you and follow me, the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was having a vision. They passed the first and second guards, and they came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left them. Then Peter came to himself and said, now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen. You see, troubled waters show us who God is. And so Peter uses words, he says, now I know without a doubt. Now I know without a doubt. Herod is not in control. God is. And when the worst thing happens and that loved one passes away, or you lose absolutely everything, even your life, you know that God is still in control. Every troubled water is a testimony of who God is. James never lived and Peter was free. See, it doesn't matter about the outcome, but it's who is with us and in us in those moments that we can find peace. When this dawned on him, I love the way Scripture is quite honest. When this is dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark. This is John Mark, the same person who wrote the Gospel of Mark, okay, which is the eyewitness. Mark and Peter had this relationship where Peter thought of him as a son. So the first place he goes to is to John Mark's house, his mother's house, okay, where many people were gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer door, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening the door, okay, without unlocking it. Peter's at the door, everybody. Isn't this the church? I mean, come on, isn't this us? Describes us well. You're out of your mind, they told her. You fool. When she kept insisting, they said, it must be an angel. Hey, how we find some spiritual answers to some times when God acts physically. I mean, it's great that the church was not perfect. It was a bunch of doubters who fell against God and his word. But Peter kept knocking. Guys, I'm here. Let me in. Let me in. And when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. They were like, God really does work. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. Tell James, and that's James the lesser, okay, which you also read, he was also one of the, not James who had died, was he speaking to an angel, okay, it was the son of Alphaeus. Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this, he said, and then he left for another place. Guys, the story is so simple. The story is a reminder this morning that troubled times are part of the course for your life. They're going to be the course for your marriage. It's going to be the course for your business. It's going to be the course for your kids. It's going to be the course for you personally. There's going to be troubled times where you have to grapple with things. And it's going to seem like life is out of control. Peter knew this was it. James was dead, and he's the next on the list. And so often we can lose our faith in those circumstances. So often we can really question God in everything that we've held dear. We can rationalize the proofs. God, you've been faithful in the past. And that's why we've got to count our blessings. Counting your blessings is looking at your life with gratitude and seeing when God has been real and you're sure of it. Time and time again, the disciples, their witness was this: we were with Jesus and we saw him. And many of them lost their lives for that statement because nobody could take that away from them. I am sure of him. And I've seen too many people shipwreck their faith because it's not grounded in prayer. It's not grounded in a relationship with God. Not on what happens in your life group or what happens in a service on a Sunday or the worship or that moment. It's those times where you and God find each other and know each other. And his spirit testifies with ours that we are his. Abba, Father. Guys, we must not forget the power of prayer, which can seem like a burden and clunky and not conducive to you see what I mean? Gets in the way. And not conducive to living the life you think the Christian life should be, that it should always just be good and nice and easy. That we should walk out of church every time just completely full. Okay, yeah, no, I've got this. That was a great message, worship, and God's going to set everything right. Troubled times are going to come. And we need to be prepared in prayer. We need to be a praying church. And they say you should never speak from Scripture. But the emphasis in this story is here is Peter was in prison, but the church were praying earnestly. We need to be a church that prays earnestly for people. Because there's going to be a time where we're no longer on this side of the praying earnestly, but we're in the water and we're drowning. We forget the power and the significance of praying. Peter prayed, but he had this faith. God, even though I may not make it out of this, you're good. You're faithful. My troubled waters are just the next step into being glory with you. I'm going to ask Brendan to come up. He's going to come just do that, the last lines of that song, the potter's hand. Brendan and Sharon, thanks. And I want us to take them because this is how we're going to end the service this morning.